This video is on how to troubleshoot pricing problems in XOLights. There are a lot of different settings that can be used to adjust pricing within the system. So if you see some pricing in the catalog that doesn't look how you want it to look, there are a number of things that you can check to make sure that your settings are how you really want them to be. So right now, we're logged in, and you're going to want to be logged in as an administrator. We're going to just kind of go through a list of things that you should check when the pricing doesn't look right to you. First, we're going to go to the vendor section here. And you'll pick the vendor that isn't looking right. Click Edit on them there. The first thing you should check are your pricing policies. So first we have the web pricing and then the store pricing. The difference there is the web pricing is what's going to display on the internet, whereas the store pricing is what you're going to see when you're logged in as either an administrator or a salesperson. So let's first check and see what pricing policies we have here. In this case, we have IMAP. If the vendor had more pricing policies, you'd see more options in here. So here you can see the chance to set IMAP as actual or IMAP as minimum. If you have one of these pricing policies set as actual, that will override all of the other pricing in the system with almost no exceptions. There is one exception we'll hit a little later in the video. Now the other one is the minimum. This will defer to your markups as long as they don't violate the vendor's pricing policy. So for example, if you're trying to set pricing at a 1.8 and the vendor's pricing policy is at a 2.0, it's going to be bumping you up to a 2.0 to keep you in compliance with the pricing policy. So if you have your pricing policies, if you have one of these set as minimum, it may be bumping you up a little bit, and in all actuality, you want it to be doing that. Now the set available as minimum here is just going to look at IMAP, UMAP, and UMRP, and if it finds those from the vendor, it will set those as minimum to keep you in compliance with the vendor's pricing policy. If you're trying to keep your in-store pricing and your web pricing the same, you really should have these set the same. The store pricing policy here is set to none. That is because a lot of times what we're dealing with is IMAP, and IMAP is internet specific. However, in this case where I have an IMAP policy and my web pricing is going to be using that IMAP policy as minimum, I may want to just go in here and set IMAP as minimum for the store just to make sure that the pricing ends up the same whether I'm logged in or logged out. Now, of course, if you're doing your web pricing and your in-store pricing differently, then you probably don't want to do that. You would set those individual pricing policies how you need them. The pricing policies are definitely something that can override or change your pricing, so please be aware of those. There are a couple of other things here that I want to point out that can definitely have an effect on the pricing in the system. First is the base cost multiplier. Now, this should not be confused with the markup. This is what you would use to change the dealer's net in the system. So this can be used for a couple of different things. A lot of people will use this to account for currency differences. For example, if I have a Canadian showroom but I'm purchasing from an American vendor using American dollars, I may put in a currency exchange rate there, and that would multiply the dealer's net to get a new dealer's net. So really you're just affecting your costs there that you're going to see in the system. Some people will put in a higher number in here to account for charges that they have to deal with, such as freight charges from the vendor. Other people will bump this number up a little bit so that when their salespeople look at costs, they think they have a smaller margin to work with than they really do, just so they can make a little bit more money. Basically, if your pricing looks off, check your base cost multiplier. If it's set as 1, you know cost is coming straight across as cost. However, if it's set as anything else, that will be multiplied by the cost, and that will affect the cost that comes out. Bottom line, you never want to set this to 0 because anything times 0 is going to be 0. So your cost will show up as 0, and then even if you have a multiplier like a markup set to it afterwards, so your retail will still come out as 0. The vendor discount here is another thing that can affect pricing. People can use this to get their discounts from the vendors in, but probably the most common problem that we see with this is if you have a vendor that's a retail only vendor, for example, Curry Tech, LBL, Besa, there's a handful of others. Essentially, they operate differently than other vendors in that they don't provide cost. So you don't get cost on your spreadsheets, you just get retail. And then they'll give you a discount. They may say 50% or 50 plus 10 or something like that to tell you how much to discount off to get to your cost. Now, if you have a retail only vendor added into your system and you have not put in your discount, then what's in there as your cost is retail pricing. And then if you add a multiplier on top of that, like a markup, you're going to end up with pricing that is way too high. All you have to do is figure out what your discount is. So for example, if they tell me it's 50%, I'd put in that. If they say 50 plus 10, calculate what that equals out to. In this case, it'd be 55%. And then you just hit submit, and that solves the problem almost instantly. There are a number of them in the system, so that is a very important thing to keep track of. Now, another thing to kind of pay attention to is XO supported versus customer maintained. And that's very easy to tell in the system. If you see maintained by and it says XOLights or it's that wider tan color, those are ones that our data team is updating the prices on, and we're communicating with the vendor to keep those where they need to be. Now, if it's in there as a customer maintained, and again, you can see here it says customer instead of XOLights, and it's in here as green. And they're even in there as two different drop downs to try and make it as clear as possible. But with the customer maintained vendors, we're not updating those. That is up to showrooms to update those. If the pricing looks wrong on those, there's a good chance that it's just gotten out of date. Now you can update those if that's a vendor that's important to you. If it's not, probably the best thing to do is just remove that vendor from your list, and then you don't have to worry about it. Now there's a number of other places where you can check and make sure what your pricing settings are, make sure they're what you need them to be. Probably the second most important one here is your item markups. A lot of people will have a default tier and a web tier. The default tier is in-store pricing. The web tier will typically be web pricing, but if you're not sure which tier your web pricing is drawing from, you can check by going into Accounts, opening up your web orders, editing the account information there, and then if you scroll down here where it says tier markup, it tells you which tier it's drawing from. So in this case, the web pricing is the web tier, but in some cases I have seen people who did have a default tier and a web tier, but the tier markup here for web orders was set to default tier. In a case like that, you are going to have all of your pricing in the default tier. Or if you have removed your web tier, all of your pricing is going to be on your default tier. To check what your markups are, click Edit on the tier you want to look at. Now in this one here, let me just kind of explain what I'm seeing. Default markup is a 2.1, so that means that anything that is not being overridden by one of the pricing policies or one of the markup or specials rows is going to get a 2.1 markup. Now, I do have a markup row in here. I hit show details and I can see what vendors are in there, and I can see they're getting a 2.2. If I could see in the system that Mida Tiffany was getting a 2.2 and they were supposed to be getting a 2.0, I can see very clearly why. They're set to a markup of 2.2. All I have to do then, we'll add in a new markup row, pick Mida Tiffany, and then set them to that 2.0. And if you don't see the markup you want in your dropdown, you can always hit custom markup, and then you can type in whatever you want that to be. Now I'm going to save that, but I'm not done. Because I still have Mitre Tiffany up on this row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Edit. Now, if Mitre Tiffany were the only one in here, I probably would have just changed the markup for that row. But where there's other ones, I'm going to hold Control. If I were using a Mac, I'd hold Command, and then click on the one that I want to remove. And now these other ones will still get that 2.2. But now Mitre Tiffany will just get the 2.0 that I wanted it to get. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save again. Now, of course, the other thing to check is your specials. Right now I don't have a specials row, but I'm going to add one in real quick. You can see this is the same list. And there could be a discount in here. I'm going to just throw in 10%. And you know, you may have that on a red line or highlight, which would make it a little easier to see, but you don't have to have one of those on for the discount to display. So again, the specials rows is definitely something you want to check. Quick reminder, if you don't have a specific group of items like a brand or a category or subcategory or something selected on the specials row, it's going to apply to everything. I'm going to go ahead and remove that row by checking this box and hitting save. Now I want to show you something here. You see some defaults down here for the markups. Let me just grab one of those and show you another place that we sometimes have problems. So here I just selected 2.0. If I had a feeling that that row wasn't working right, like I was seeing it say that it was being set to a 2.0, but maybe it wasn't actually being set to a 2.0. Let me show you where that could be coming from. If I hit return here and go back to this page that we were at first, you see these markup amounts down here. These are what appear in that drop-down when I click that drop-down. So of course you can set in your own standard ones. And the difficult thing though is sometimes when people set their standard ones, they remember to put the name of the markup in here, but then forget to actually come over here and set the markup. So if I had added a new markup row and said that I wanted this to be a 2.25, so now that's what I'm calling the row. I just put the name of it in there. And then I save it and go and use that markup row somewhere in one of my tiers. It's not going to work properly because you can see it's actually still set to a 1.0, which is not what I want it to. So you have to remember to come over here and actually change the markup. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit save. You can do the same thing with percentages, the margins as well. Just remember that this is where you actually control what the markup or margin is. This is just the name of what it is. So if you've checked in the vendors area and you've checked the markups area and your pricing still doesn't look right, let me show you the next place to check. Let's go to admin items. Now, typically if you're looking for some sort of pricing problem and you've come to this point, it's going to be on individual items rather than on an entire category or an entire vendor. So you'll type in the item number that you're having problems with, at least one of them, and hit search. I'm going to just pull up some items on the page real quick so we have something to look at. Okay, so when an item comes up here, you can see, first of all, here is the cost in the system for it. Here is what the price, in other words, the retail is. And then you have your base cost multiplier. It is possible to set base cost multipliers for individual items rather than for entire vendors. So just because you check the vendors page doesn't mean that the base cost multiplier for a specific item is what you see on that vendor page. So I just clicked edit for that particular item. One of the things that you may see if the price is off for an item is maybe in here the base cost multiplier will be off, in which case all you really have to do is uncheck this. The other ones that could potentially be off are the markup amount here and the web markup amount. That's because these areas allow you to do a hard override for pricing for a particular item. If I wanted to, I could pick a specific markup for this item, or I can hit custom markup, type in a markup amount, or even hit this $sign and type in a fixed price. Now this can be done with an import as well. So that just because you haven't done it on this page doesn't mean it wasn't done in an import. And notice here you can do the same thing with markup amount. So again, web markup amount is going to be the price that it displays on the internet. Markup amount is going to be the price that is displaying in store, in other words, when you log in as an administrator or salesperson. And if these have been overridden, this is a hard override. It will override IMAP. Now, if you've only got a handful of items, you'd probably check them and could fix them by yourself. If you know that it was done through a spreadsheet and you don't have that spreadsheet, we can actually get a list of everything in the system that has had a price override done to it and get that to you to kind of help you fix the problem a little bit more quickly. All right, let me show you another place where pricing could be overridden. That's over here in quoted items. Typically, people will use this to enter in quotes that they get from a vendor. So for example, I have a couple of them here that you can see. We have the actual items, and then over here you've got the original price right here, and then this is the quoted price. In other words, a price that has been imported or added in manually to override the cost. And again, this is the cost. Over here you can see what the retail is that's being displayed. So if your cost is off, you may just check your quotes real quick. I would recommend just coming in, going to admin, quoted items, and then actually typing in the item number that you're thinking might have a quote on it and hitting look up quotes. Or you can just hit the look up quotes button to pull up everything that is in there. You may have more than one page. This one just has a single page, but if it did, you would be able to flip through the different pages and take a look at what you had in there for a quote. If you've gone through all of the different things that we've talked about in this video and your pricing still looks off, there's a chance that it's just in the system wrong. If that's the case, please contact client services right away. They'll need to know what vendor you're having problems with. They'll need some example item numbers with what the price should be and what the price is that you're seeing. And they'll also need to know where you got your pricing. For example, you may say, I got this from the March 1st price list, in which case we'll go back and compare that to our records, see if there was a price list that was missed, see if maybe we have a different price list than what you have. At any rate, it gives us something to go back to the vendor with, because that's usually what ends up happening is we'll go back and have a conversation with the vendor and say, hey, we're seeing one thing and the customer is telling us another thing, and then the vendor can clarify for us what the correct pricing should be, and we can make any changes that we need to in the system or get back to you with the answer that we got from them. So this has been a video on how to troubleshoot pricing problems. If you still have questions, please contact client services at clientservices@xolights.com. Feel free to also use any of the additional training resources on the site. And as always, thanks for watching and have a great day.